If you had told me 10 years ago that I'd be living in a rotting house with a bunch of other forgotten souls, eating out of dumpsters and drinking whatever I could afford or steal, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, I was a man with a job, a home, and a future. I built things, bridges, apartment complexes, skyscrapers. My hands made the city rise. But cities don't remember the men who built them. I was 39 when I fell from the scaffolding, snapping 2 ribs and twisting my knee so bad the doctor said I'd never work construction again. Just like that, my purpose was taken from me. No work meant no money. No money meant no rent. My wife, tired of my bitterness and drunken spirals, packed up and left. Soon after, the bank took the apartment, and then the city swallowed me whole. That was nearly a decade ago. I learned fast that if you wanted to last on the streets, you had to find your own people. The ones who wouldn't rob you in your sleep or leave you bleeding in an alley for a half-smoked cigarette. The ones who understood the quiet suffering, the way cold burrowed into your bones, how hunger was something you carried like an extra limb. We weren't friends, exactly, but we were the closest thing to family that life had left us. We lived in an abandoned building on the south side, just past the train tracks. It was a skeletal thing, brick walls stripped bare, the roof half collapsed, the floors rotted through in some places. But it was shelter. We called it the Hollow because it felt like something had been carved out of it. Or maybe because we all felt hollow ourselves. There were about 15 of us on any given night, depending on who had managed to stay alive. Among them was Eddie. Eddie had been on the streets longer than most of us. A wiry old man, always wrapped in the same patched-up army jacket, always smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and sweat. He had this way of making you feel safe, even when there was nothing safe about the life we lived. The kind of guy who would share his last swig of whiskey, even if it meant he'd go without. "You gotta keep moving, boy," Eddie would say. "That's how you stay alive. Keep moving, keep breathing, and don't let the cold get into your bones." And for the longest time, Eddie kept moving, kept breathing, kept surviving, until the cough started. It wasn't just a regular cough. It was deep, hollow, like something was trying to claw its way out of his chest. At first, we joked about it, telling Eddie he sounded like a dying engine, that maybe he should lay off the cheap cigarettes. He'd grin, wave us off, take another drag, and keep going. But the cough didn't go away. It got worse. By the 3rd day, Eddie could barely catch his breath. By the 4th, he stopped cracking jokes. His face turned gaunt, eyes sunken like the shadows were eating him from the inside out. The worst part wasn't the sickness. It was the silence that followed. On the 7th night, Eddie went to sleep in his usual spot by the broken fireplace. When morning came, his blanket was there, his jacket was there, his half-empty bottle of whiskey was there. But Eddie was gone. No one saw him leave. No one heard him pack up. And Eddie wasn't the type to just disappear without saying something. We searched. We checked the alleys, the soup kitchens, even the police station, thinking maybe he got picked up. But there was nothing. It was like the city had swallowed him whole, just like it did with all of us, eventually. For a while, we told ourselves he'd just moved on. Maybe he found a better place to stay. Maybe someone took him in. We wanted to believe that. Needed to believe that. But then Mark started coughing. And then Sam. And then the woman we called Birdie, because she was small and jittery and always moving like a nervous sparrow. One by one, the sound of that deep, rattling cough began to echo through the hollow, bouncing off the crumbling walls. I told myself it was just the flu, a cold going around, nothing we hadn't lived through before. But deep down I knew, whatever had taken Eddie was coming for the rest of us. Each one of them, gone without a trace, always after the cough took hold of them. It wasn't just the hollow. Every now and then, I'd hear talk from other street folks, people disappearing from under bridges, from alleyway camps, from doorways where they'd been sleeping for years. And no one saw them go. I don't scare easy. When you've lived like this as long as I have, you either toughen up or get buried. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't getting to me. I wasn't the only one. Carl felt it too. Carl and I had been together since before the Hollow. We met outside a shelter a few winters back, both of us trying to get in before the cold killed us. He was younger than me, maybe early 30s, but rough around the edges. He had that same look I did, like life had taken him by the throat and never let go. "What the hell's happening, man?" Carl muttered one night, his breath curling in the cold air. "You telling me all these people just got up and left? Just like that?" I didn't answer. "Maybe it's the city," he went on, lowering his voice like someone might be listening. "You hear about that new mayor? He's been talking about cleaning up the streets. Maybe they're rounding us up." I wanted to tell him he was being paranoid, that no one cared enough about us to bother. But I couldn't, because deep down, I was thinking the same thing. "You and me, we need to move," Carl said. "Find somewhere else. Somewhere safer." I nodded. "Yeah, maybe a different abandoned house, further from the main roads. We could lay low until we figured out what was happening." But before we could leave, Carl started coughing. It came out of nowhere. One night, we were passing a bottle back and forth, making plans to get out of the hollow. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of his lungs trying to tear themselves apart. "Immutarat." "No, not you." Carl wiped his mouth on his sleeve and looked at the blood smeared across it. His face went pale. "Shit," he whispered. The next few days were hell. The cough got worse. Then came the fever, the night sweats, the way he couldn't keep food down, no matter how much I tried to make him eat. I tried to take him to the clinic, told him he needed help. They barely looked at him before shaking their heads. "No ID, no insurance, no treatment," they said. I begged. "Please," I said. "He's dying." They didn't care. So I brought him back to the hollow and did what I could. Kept him warm, made sure he drank water. Told him stories about my old life, trying to distract him from the pain. And then one morning, I woke up and Carl was gone. His blanket was still there. His coat, even his half-finished bottle of whiskey. But Carl was gone. I ran outside, searching the streets, calling his name. Nothing. No one had seen him. No one had heard anything. It was like he never existed. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just some sickness. This wasn't just bad luck. Someone was taking them. And I was going to find out who. I knew it was coming. The first time I felt the itch in my throat, I told myself it was nothing. Just the cold air, the dust in the hollow, maybe the cigarette butts I picked off the street when I was desperate. But by the third day, I couldn't pretend anymore. It started as a dry, nagging cough, the kind that made my ribs ache. Then came the heaviness in my chest, like I was breathing through water. By the end of the week, every breath rattled like broken glass in my lungs. And then there was the blood. I remember spitting onto the concrete floor of the hollow and watching the color spread, dark red, almost black against the filth. The sight of it made my stomach twist. This was it, the thing that had taken Eddie, and Carl, and the rest. It had me now. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined waking up to hands grabbing me in the dark, dragging me off to wherever the others had gone. So I stayed awake, listening to my own breath struggle in my chest. I needed help. I still wasn't sure if this was just some sickness spreading through the homeless, or if someone was making sure we never got better. Either way, I didn't have much time left. The first clinic turned me away without even looking at me. The nurse behind the desk wrinkled her nose like she could smell the sickness on me. "We can't help you without ID." I went to another. Same response. I tried the emergency room, sat in the waiting area for 3 hours, hacking into my sleeve while people with scraped knees and sprained ankles got called in before me. Finally, a doctor came over. He was wearing gloves before he even touched me. "You need to leave," he said. "We can't treat you here." I wanted to fight, to demand answers, but I didn't have the strength. The weight loss had started too. My clothes hung off me like they belonged to someone else. My legs felt like they could buckle at any moment. So I left. That night, I stole a notebook from a dollar store. If I was going to die, I wanted someone to know what had happened. I wrote down everything. Eddie's cough, the disappearances, Carl's fever, the way no one, not a single hospital or clinic would treat us. The hollow had fewer people now. The ones who remained kept their distance. They looked at me like I was already dead. Maybe I was. I woke up to voices. Low, muffled whispers. Careful, deliberate movements. The soft crunch of boots on dirt. I forced myself to stay still, my breathing shallow, my body limp. They said this was the last one. One of them muttered. "Damn miracle he's still breathing," said another. I cracked my eyes open, just enough to see them. 2 figures in hazmat suits, the kind you only see in movies when something real bad has happened. They were standing near the entrance of my shelter, their gloved hands hovering over me, like they were checking if I was still alive. "Let's bag him and go," the first one said. "We're already behind schedule." The second one sighed. "Yeah, let's wrap this up before someone starts asking questions." The press is sniffing around. Last thing we need is a damn news crew getting wind of it. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just some disease tearing through the streets. This was deliberate. The city wasn't trying to save us. They were trying to erase us. I waited until they reached for me. Then I bolted. Or at least, I tried. My body was weak, bones like glass, muscles barely holding me together. I lunged sideways, knocking over a stack of crates, scattering old bottles across the floor. "Shit," one of them yelled. I didn't stop. I stumbled through the doorway and into the alley, my legs threatening to collapse beneath me. Every step sent daggers through my lungs. My vision blurred, but I kept going. Behind me, I heard them curse, heard the quick shuffle of their boots as they scrambled after me. I turned a corner and nearly slammed into a dumpster. My hands grasped at the metal, steadying myself. My breath came out in ragged, wet gasps. I expected to hear more footsteps, more shouting, but there was nothing. When I turned around, the alley was empty. They were gone. No chase, no stragged. Like they knew I wouldn't last long anyway. I kept moving. The city was eerily quiet. No cars, no voices, just the distant hum of street lights and the occasional wail of a siren that never seemed to get any closer. I coughed into my sleeve. More blood, more proof I wasn't supposed to be here anymore. Then I saw it, a crumpled piece of paper, half buried in a trash bin outside what used to be a public health building. The official stamp caught my eye. Something about it felt wrong. I reached in with a trembling hand, pulled it out. My fingers smoothed the wrinkles enough for me to read. Operation Purge, final phase. My stomach twisted. The document was short, clinical, like it was talking about pest control instead of people. Primary objective: reduce vagrant population via targeted infection. Delivery method: introduce carrier, patient 0, deployed in high-density homeless areas. Expected results: containment of spread within 90 days. Full eradication projected by Q4. Cleanup protocol: recovery of remaining infected before media interference. I felt sick. They did this. They brought tuberculosis into our camps, let it spread like wildfire, let it kill us slowly. Then, when the sickness had done enough damage, they came in and finished the job. No treatment, no mercy, just removal, like we were rats in the gutter. I dropped the paper. My hands were shaking. My breath hitched in my throat. I was the last one left, and they were still looking for me. I should be dead. The fever should have burned me out. My lungs should have filled with blood. My body should have been found in a ditch somewhere, scooped up and thrown into whatever pit they were tossing the rest of us into. But somehow, I was still here. The sickness lingered, gnawing at my ribs, but it stopped getting worse. My breath still rattled in my chest, but I could walk. My skin stayed cold and clammy, but I could think clearly again. I wasn't supposed to survive. Maybe I was just too stubborn to die. For weeks, I lived in the shadows. I stopped sleeping in shelters. I never stayed in one place too long. I kept to the alleys, moving between abandoned buildings, staying ahead of whatever cleanup crew was still out there. And the whole time, I held onto the notebook. It was the only thing that proved any of this had happened. My words scrawled in shaking hands. The dates of every disappearance. The bloodstains on the pages, proof of the sickness that had killed the others but somehow let me live. But who was going to believe me? I tried. I found a public library, used one of their computers to send anonymous emails to reporters, city officials, even doctors. No one answered. I called a news station from a payphone, barely able to get the words out through my ruined throat. "They're killing us," I rasped. "The city." They hung up. I broke into a government office one night, slipping past a rusted back door that didn't lock all the way. I left the Operation Purge document on a desk. When I came back the next day, it was gone. No headlines, no investigations, just silence. In the end, all I could do was leave the notebook where someone might find it. I chose a news agency, some clean, glass-covered building downtown where people in suits walked in and out, sipping coffee like they weren't standing on the graves of people like me. I walked up just before dawn, hunched and shaking, coughing into my sleeves so no one would look too closely. I placed a notebook on the front steps, weighed it down with a rock so the wind wouldn't take it. Then I walked away. Did they find it? Did someone pick it up, flip through the pages, feel the weight of what had been done? I don't know. I never went back to check. One night, I returned to the hollow. I don't know why. Maybe to see if there was anything left of my people. Maybe to say goodbye. The place was different. Someone had cleared it out, taken what little we had left behind. The walls were more bare, the floor swept clean of old blankets and bottles. But it wasn't empty. A new wave had moved in, different faces, same story. The forgotten, the abandoned, the ones the city wanted to pretend didn't exist. I watched them from the shadows, unnoticed, unseen. And then I heard it, a cough. A man, maybe in his 30s, hunched over by the fireplace where Carl used to sleep. His breath hitched, deep and wet. He wiped his mouth on his sleeve and kept talking to the others, like it was nothing, like it hadn't already started. The cycle was beginning again. I turned and walked away. No one saw me go. By morning, it would be like I was never there at all. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.